There comes a time in every young man's life where you're going to have to choose between sitting inside all day playing Counter-Strike or going to prison. This is standard in the process of becoming a man, but now that we're well beyond the statute of limitations for most of the crimes I committed in middle school, hypothetically, in Minecraft in GTA 5, this is a fictional story, I can now share with you the story of the fateful year that I dipped my toes into the criminal underworld. Now, mostly joking, but I'm also pretty sure everybody had that phase at some point in their life, right? Where you just kind of crash out and commit a bunch of crimes. That's a pretty standard teen behavior, rebelling against your parents, but nothing actually bad, just like stealing and vandalism and drugs and trespassing and running from the cops, right? Pretty normal. Anyways, this all started back in middle school. I was in like 8th grade, so 14 years old maybe, and I was, as you'd expect, a real fucking nerd. I played TF2 and Counter-Strike all the time. I weighed about 98 pounds. If I'd had a particularly big dinner that day, I wore glasses, I had this horrid long hair, and was generally just extremely insecure. Like, it's middle school, we all remember how that was. It's important to note that my mother, bless her sweet, sweet heart, was deeply concerned about me. She hated that I spent all of my time on the computer, the family computer in the living room. I sat my ass on that dining room chair every chance I got and didn't get up unless she got a crowbar out from the basement and pried me off of it. Every time I sat on the computer, I could feel her mood shift. Her very being turned sour as I too was souring and rotting away watching the Yogscast or whatever the hell I was doing back then. It got so bad that she started begging me to just go watch TV instead of being on the computer because it was just something else. Like my eyes were 10 feet further away from the screen so they wouldn't melt out of my brain. I guess that's pretty valid looking back on it. I really was on the internet way too much. But at the time, whenever she'd make me get off the computer, it just made me want to get back on that much more. Anyways, it's very important context for what's to come, because when I started actually leaving the house, I think she was so grateful that I wasn't playing video games anymore that she never really questioned the types of behaviors that I replaced them with. Really, my life of crime began at the nexus of all criminal behavior, 8th grade Spanish class. I walked into that classroom on a crisp fall day, the first period of my first day of 8th grade, and I was assigned a seat next to the young man who would change the course of my life. His name, we'll say, is Brett, and nobody becomes a criminal or a drug addict or a doctor or a lawyer without somebody influencing them towards a certain life path. For me, this person was Brett. And I'll set the scene here. Brett was shorter than me, maybe 5'5". He wasn't fat, but he was kind of chubby, and he had a very jolly face, a round face with these brilliant, sparkling blue eyes. No homo, but his eyes are very memorable. You can normally just tell by someone's eyes if they're intelligent. You could tell that this was a very smart kid. He was very funny. He didn't give a flying fuck about school in the slightest. But you knew he was smart and very, very easy to get along with. He also had the most insane hair you've ever seen. It was like this matted afro mass of tangles, like a foot long in every direction. Essentially, he was a white guy that looked like he wanted dreads, but gave up, and now his hair just hasn't seen a brush for the last 2 years. Very, very unique looking guy, and I'd never met him before, but very quickly we became very good friends. Some people you just kind of get along with right off the bat, and Brett was one of them. We would talk and laugh and fuck around all class, and I learned 0 Spanish that year. And during class, Brett would tell me all these crazy stories about all sorts of shenanigans that he got up to. See, Brett smoked weed. Brett had done all sorts of drugs and ran around wreaking havoc, doing, graffiti and shoplifting, all sorts of hoodlum stuff that I, who barely even went outside because it would take away from my computer time, couldn't even fathom someone in 8th grade doing. All class, he'd tell me stories, and we'd walk around the halls at school, fucking around, but soon we started hanging out after school, too. My middle school was across the street from a very large shopping center. It was a strip mall, but 3 of them crammed all together to make one mega strip mall area. If you can think of a store, it was probably there. And at our school, every Friday, all of the cool people, all the popular kids, would go walk across the street to the shopping center after school. You know, you'd go get food, you'd talk to girls, you'd go walk around, you know, real teen shit. That I imagine this also doesn't really exist anymore. I imagine kids just now go home and have phone time, mutual phone time. I don't really know. But I'd never gone across the street because I didn't have anyone to go with until Brett came along. You remember what I said about my mom before? Well, you should have seen her face when I asked her if I could go hang out outside with my new friend Brett, who I'd made in Spanish class. She was overjoyed. Of course she said yes, and we lived close enough to the school and the shopping center that I could just kind of walk there after school and walk home and it would all be fine. Thinking back on it, like, I didn't have a phone. I can't imagine a parent today being like, yeah, go ahead, young teenage son, go traipse around town without a cell phone, no way to contact me. I don't know where you are, just, you know, go crazy. I feel like that's a thing from the past, but maybe I'm wrong. Any children in the comments, please let me know. Also, please leave. That's weird. Anyways, the very first time that I ventured into the great unknown of the suburban shopping center across from my middle school, that I actually frequented quite regularly with my mother on weekends in her minivan, but it felt like a different world this time. I was independent. I could do whatever I wanted. My parents weren't here. I felt very small, but also very grown up. And while we were walking over, Brett took a vape out of his backpack. Ooh. Nowadays, every fourth grade teacher has USB-C chargers in the back of the classroom for the kids to use when their geek bars run out of battery. But back in 2015, vaping was not a thing. This was before Jewel took over the high school bathroom, and Brett had one of those big old box mods. You know, no nicotine, just pure electronic chemical delivery straight to your lungs for the love of the game, because it looked cool. I ripped that shit. I think it was like cherry flavored, like I was James Bond smoking a cigar in a tuxedo overlooking the grand city of London. Like I thought I was the coolest kid probably on the planet. Anyways, Brett and I, and we had one other friend from Spanish class, we'll call him Carl, walked into this strip mall like we owned the place. And we made our way to the Dollar Tree. Those hallowed halls filled with chips and paper clips, and I don't know what the fuck else they have in Dollar Tree, like those little popper things that you throw at the ground and they'd explode. Remember those? Those are fun. The store was busy, and the two sorry employees there were so wrapped up in controlling the masses of value-seeking patrons that they didn't notice the three stupid kids walking in with their backpacks on, shiftily looking around and making their way towards the candy aisle. Now, I was terrified out of my mind about what was about to occur here. I was shaking like a leaf, 100% certain that a SWAT team was about to bust out from behind the Mountain Dew refrigerator aisle and take us to Guantanamo Bay for 20 years of hard labor. But Brett went about his business with the cool confidence of a seasoned criminal, and Carl was just, I don't know, he was along for the ride. I don't know what Carl was doing. In that candy aisle, I watched Brett take a bag of candy. I truly don't know. I can't remember. Jolly Ranchers will say he took a bag and he put it into his backpack. And then he kept walking. No SWAT teams, no police sirens. He just kept walking. And he made his way over to the chips. We were just kind of following him around at this point. He grabbed some chips into the backpack. We went over to the gum, the soda. We went around the whole store. And Brett was just grabbing shit. Obviously, he'd wait until nobody was around. He'd put the goods into his pocket or into his backpack, and nobody seemed to care. We were in there for a good few minutes, and then we just walked out. And it was at this moment that my inner eye opened. It was like an entirely new world had just been revealed to me. It turns out that you don't actually have to pay for stuff. You can just take it. The cash register is an optional feature at retail stores in America. It also turns out that that's not always the case, but we'll get there. Ooh, but what about the cameras? Do you guys really think that the Dollar Tree has enough money to pay somebody to watch the cameras? Do you think they have enough money to even install working cameras? 99% of the time, the cameras you see in these stores aren't even on, especially the shitty places like Dollar Tree. So that was just not a problem for a little criminal enterprise. Also, by the way, I absolutely do not condone stealing or shoplifting. This is one of the biggest regrets of my Minecraft GTA 5 life. You will almost certainly get caught. And also, it just makes society worse for everybody. It's not about you, it's about society. This is a very fun story about when I was a retarded teenager in Minecraft over a decade ago, and is not at all reflective of my current views or behaviors, or real life interactions. I didn't know it at the time, but this was a very pivotal moment in my life. I was standing at the precipice of becoming a very different person from the reclusive gaming nerd who I always had been. And I'm not gonna lie, guys, I jumped eagerly, headfirst, into this new way of life. And after Dollar Tree, we went over to Five Below. Now, if you don't know what Five Below is, it's like this cheap garbage store. At least back in the day, they had lots of like toys and candy and gay t-shirts and stuff. But now it was my turn. We walked in again, my heart was beating out of my chest, and we just did a couple laps around the store, scoping things out. I set my eyes on a pack of 5 gum, which was always the coolest gum back in the day. If you wanted to be cool, you had to chew 5 gum. I held it in my hand and walked around a little bit more and made my way to the back corner of the store by the gift wrap or something. I just slipped it into my pocket, just like that. Again, no SWAT teams, and we left. I remember making my way to the front of the store, absolutely certain that some employee was going to stop me and shake me down and call my mom, but it didn't happen. Out in the parking lot, we celebrated our successful heist. We had a grand feast of Dollar Tree soda and 5 gum. And after that, I walked home. In the following weeks, things only escalated from there. At first, we were going once a week, grabbing candy and chips from Dollar Tree and Five Below, and then just walking around, hanging out. Then it would be twice a week. 3 times a week, making the rounds at our usual stops, and it got to the point where we'd be walking into that Dollar Tree, all 3 of us, filling our backpacks with loot, and then going to Five Below, grabbing some more. Life was good, and we had unlimited free food. But it stopped being about the merchandise very quickly. It was just kind of fun to mess around with your friends and commit petty crimes. Like, that was a very exciting thing to do for me, who up until that point had not lived a very exciting life. But the real heisting began when we unlocked the grocery store paper towel fort method. In this big shopping center, the epicenter of my youth, there was also a very large grocery store. It was much harder to steal from than Dollar Tree, okay? I don't think the Dollar Tree employees gave a fuck about what happened in there, and they definitely knew we were stealing, they just didn't care. The grocery store, though, was another beast altogether. The potential payoff was much higher, but the aisles were wider, the lighting was better, and there was a lot more people and employees kind of just milling around. They also had working cameras. But of course, Brett had a solution for this too. Now, you've probably seen those videos on YouTube where someone makes a paper towel fort in a grocery store and tries to hide there for as long as possible. Like, in the paper towel aisle, you hollow out the back layer and hide in there, and you build a wall of paper towels in the front. Essentially, you can make like a little room and be on the shelf and nobody can see you. Now, I'm proud to say that we did this way before it was a YouTube trend, but we used the method for much more nefarious purposes. At this point, we had assembled a small gang of thieves. It was me, Brett, Carl, and 2 other kids, temporary characters, who were along for the job. And one day, after hitting our usual spots, we made our way to this big grocery store and began executing the paper towel fort method. And to be fair, we were being incredibly loud and obvious about it, but I think on this particular day, the employees were just busy doing other stuff because nobody bothered us as we completely removed and then reassembled an entire display of paper towels and then shoved one of our friends back there to be the dedicated repository for our stolen goods. We left him in the shelf while the rest of us walked around the store and started grabbing shit. And I specifically remember getting those Mio water flavoring drops, like 10 of those. They were like $6 each, and then a bunch of beef jerky. And then once we had our goods, we would walk somewhat covertly into the paper towel aisle and pass the merchandise through the fort to the guy that was hiding in the back of the shelf. And he'd put it all into his backpack. Again, we were not being slick at all about this. Like, we were running around and laughing and yelling, and I'm genuinely so baffled that we didn't get caught on round 1 of this, but we didn't. And once the first guy's backpack was full, it was my turn. So I climbed into the paper towel shelf and they closed me in there, and I waited for a while until little hands started appearing and dropping more candy and Oreos and God knows what else into the fort. And I was shoving it all into my backpack, and eventually, once again, we just got up and walked out. No opposition, no employees yelling at us, no problem. Now this was a life-changing haul. We had a significant amount of contraband at this point, and we were like going apeshit in the parking lot, like, whoa, yeah, let's go. You'd think we stole like the Mona Lisa with how excited we were after stealing enough chips and candy to give every single one of us type 2 diabetes. And I remember bringing most of it to school the next day and becoming the coolest motherfucker around. I had the popular people talking to me, asking me for candy as I made it rain with full-size Reese's like it was nothing. And I guess in 8th grade, all you need is candy to be cool. And I remember at one point having literally like a mob of people surrounding my locker as I was taking those, Mio drops and packs of gum and just throwing it into the crowd like I was feeding pigeons at the park. Things were really looking up for young me, and life was definitely more exciting in those days than they were in the past. Of course, we went back to the grocery store. We executed the paper towel fort method numerous times with flawless success until one day, we didn't. Our typical Friday heist started as it normally did. We made our rounds, we built the paper towel fort, shoved Carl in there to be our repository for the day. This time it was just 4 of us. It was Brett, myself, Carl, and one of the other side characters from the first heist. We'll call him Jack. We left Carl in the fort to go walk around the store and start grabbing our goods. We made our way through the aisles. We got some more Mios. Very popular back in the day. We got some soda. You know the drill at this point. But when we made it back to the paper towel aisle, we saw this lady there. She was an employee of the grocery store who we'd never seen before. And she was digging around in the paper towels, right where Carl was hiding. And you could see Carl's leg sticking out as she was grabbing paper towels and throwing them behind her. She was yelling. She was like, "Get out of there. We got you. We got you." And then she looked up at us. And you could just see this evil glint in her eyes, pure hatred and malice. She knew that she had finally caught us. And she just said, "Stop right there. You're coming with me." Now, all 3 of us froze. This was absolutely not part of the plan. And again, we were 14, so the stern manager of a grocery store is pretty much as powerful and terrifying as the president of the United States at this stage of life. Carl very ungraciously removes himself from the paper towel fort. Another employee joins the manager, and they start walking us back towards the security office in the front of the store. Now, Brett, like I said, was a seasoned criminal at this point. This was not his first run-in with the law, nor would it be his last by any means. So he was indignant from the start. "No, I don't need to come with you. You're not my mom. Fuck you, lady. Why are you taking us?" And the manager was just as indignant to us, ushering us towards the office, saying, "I'm going to call the cops. We've been watching you for weeks, blah, blah, blah." I was shitting myself at this point, and so was Carl, and especially Jack, who, again, side character. We just kind of roped him into this. And we made our way closer and closer to the office. And at one point, Brett just ran. He busted past this woman, sprinted through the automatic doors, and left us 3 behind, making us look all the more guilty in the process. He literally just left. And now at this point, I had a choice. Brett was gone. I could risk it all and make a break for the door, or be honest and face my mistakes. My heart was beating faster than it probably ever had. My legs were shaking. My entire being was vibrating with terror for what was about to happen. I never actually thought we'd get caught doing this, but the reality of everything that we'd been doing for the past few weeks all started to come crashing down. We were probably 15 feet from the office at this point and getting closer and closer with every step. But the office was also right across from the front entrance of the grocery store. Now, I had no idea what was going to happen if I got locked in that room, but I had a pretty strong feeling that it would involve calling my mother, which could not happen under any circumstances. So, I ran. I broke into a full sprint in this grocery store. Shoppers all around me watching as I fucking 360 spin move around the manager, and she's shouting for someone to stop me. I make it past her and towards the door, where I have to pause. I have to pause there for like 3 seconds while I wait for the automatic door to fucking open. And trust me, those were the 3 longest seconds of my life. But I made it through, and I ran out into the parking lot where Brett was waiting, cool as a cucumber. Now let me just say, in reality, the stakes were not very high here, but at the time, my entire world was at risk. I could not and would not allow my parents to find out about this. Carl and Jack, however, did not run away. They were held in that office for like 30 minutes, and apparently the manager was asking for all of our names, which Jack gave them, fucking snitch. Carl was a real one. Carl never snitched, but Jack, the side character, caved without any resistance, which is fair. We're like 13. He gave them our names, he told them where we went to school, and they had our photos, so it was only a matter of time before the jig was up. This evil manager lady was going to tell our school, and subsequently our parents. Right? Wrong. Jack and Carl were released from prison, and we never heard anything about it ever again. They didn't call the school, they didn't call the police or anything. They just let us go. Looking back, yeah, it's just a bunch of stupid kids. This probably happened all the time for them. And again, When you work at a grocery store, like, how much can you possibly care about this sort of thing? Now, Jack was traumatized, so he stopped hanging out with us after this. So then it was just me, Brett, and Carl from then on out. Funnily enough, we ended up going back and getting chased out of there like 3 more times before eventually I think they had our pictures up on the wall. Every employee knew who we were, and it was just best if we avoided that store altogether. I remember one time I actually had to go in there with my mom because, shocker, she needed to buy groceries. And I was so terrified because I obviously couldn't tell her why I didn't want to go into that grocery store. So I just had to go incognito. Like I walked in with my hood up, my head down, and luckily nobody seemed to recognize me. After a while, the stealing became pretty bland. You can only eat so much stolen candy. And while we still frequented Dollar Tree and Five Below for our occasional confectionery needs or to steal lighters or pot holders or I don't know what you need there. But our lives as career thieves died down, and we started developing new hobbies like skateboarding and vandalism and drugs. Now that was until we committed our most daring heist yet. This one was a me and Brett solo mission, and we actually happened on it completely by accident. Aside from stealing, one of our main activities was walking around and doing nothing. We spent a lot of time near the school and the shopping center just aimlessly wandering around and talking. Very fond teenage memories, right? We started skateboarding, which was incredibly fun, and essentially just explored every back street, alley, and trail within a 1-mile radius of the middle school. Our school was also tucked away a little bit from the main road, with a fairly sizable paved service road in front of it for the buses and the parents to use when you're picking up your kids. It was also used for like overflow parking, so you had lots of cars and buses and trucks parked on this road. And again, it's right across from the middle school that we attended every day. One day we were just walking along this road, Brett and I, with nothing to do, and it was probably like 4 p.m. School had let out a few hours ago, and aside from the occasional car driving by, there was nobody around. We're walking, and all of a sudden, Brett just stops, and he beelines it towards this unmarked box truck on the side of the road. I followed him and watched as he made his way to the back of the truck, where that big rolly door is. You know what I'm talking about. And he started messing around with the latch. Now, obviously, we didn't know what was in this truck. It was an unmarked truck parked across from our school, and obviously it was locked. Except it wasn't. He lifted up that big metal latch. There was no lock, no driver, and nobody around, so he just opened this huge truck door about halfway, and as sunlight spilled into the back of this dark truck, and the contents were revealed to us, our eyes widened, and we stared ahead in utter disbelief at what we had just found. Bread, as far as the eye could see. Pallets of bread stacked from floor to ceiling in this random truck parked on the side of the road. White bread, wheat bread, sourdough, and best of all, cinnamon raisin bread. Fresh from the factory and just there, waiting for us. And obviously we did what any 2 14-year-olds would do in this situation. We climbed in and started grabbing as much bread as we could carry. There was nothing to do with all of this bread, but that didn't matter. I'm talking like 5 grocery stores worth of bread in one convenient truck. And there was nobody around that could stop us from absolutely going apeshit with it. This was also probably the funniest thing that could have possibly happened because it's bread. It's just kind of a funny food. So we were just hanging out in the back of this truck, tearing open loaves of bread and throwing it at each other. We were having bread fights. We were throwing it at people's cars. It was so absurd. We probably made like 10 trips to and from this bread truck. And we ended up grabbing probably like 100 full loaves each and taking it all into the forest where we made a bread fort, which was essentially just an entire small shelter built entirely out of loaves of bread. We also made a bread, which was a bed made out of bread. And let me just say, this was like peak teenage existence. It was so fucking funny. And we had no concept of just how wrong this actually was, breaking into a truck and stealing the merchandise inside of it. Like I said before, this truck was parked on the side of the road. Not a busy road, but several cars had driven by us as we slowly and carelessly played with the bread. Nobody had stopped or looked like they cared, but several people had definitely seen us, 2 teenagers with backpacks in the front of the middle school, messing around in the back of a truck. The heist itself and subsequent shenanigans were successfully executed without any hindrance. We were probably out there for a solid 40 minutes with that truck wide open, going in and out of it without any trouble at all. And eventually we got bored of the bread truck. We closed it up and started walking home the same way that we always do. But about 5 minutes into our walk, well out of sight of the bread truck, but still fairly close by, to my absolute horror, the worst thing that could have possibly happened happened. We were on the sidewalk, and about a block down the road, we see a very menacing, very real police car turn onto the street and start heading straight for us. This is not mall security, school security. It wasn't, a mom in a minivan. This was a real cop. And I turned to Brett with utter terror in my eyes, only to find that Brett was not there. He was already about 20 feet away, skateboarding down a side street. He hadn't said a single word. He just saw the cop and booked it. And honestly, respect to him, because once again, the man was a criminal mastermind. He knew what to do. At this point, the cop was already way too close. I had made eye contact with the man, and this was no grocery store manager, okay? This was real, and if I made a mistake, there would be very real consequences. And at this point, I had to simply accept the fact that I was going to jail. The Dollar Tree heists were nothing in comparison to this, and there was nowhere to run. Brett was gone, and I was alone as the cop slowly pulled up beside me and rolled down his window. He called to me, said, "Where'd your friend go?" To which I had no good answer at all. I don't even remember what I said during this whole interaction that much. I genuinely think I blacked out from this point on. I remember him asking where I'd come from and where I was going. I told him, I was walking home from school as I stood there quivering and pissing myself. I told him I was just walking home from school. I don't know where my friend went. And he asked me what my address was, so I told him. I watched as he looked it up, and luckily I truly was walking home, so none of it was really a lie. And after a few minutes and probably some other questions that I don't remember, he left. Now I can only speculate from here on what happened, but I'm fairly certain one of the many people that had driven past us while we were inside the truck had called the cops. Probably some bitter, resentful soccer mom with nothing to live for except causing misery to others. But there wasn't really any evidence that we had done it, despite us being the only two teenagers walking around on foot within any sort of reasonable distance. But there wasn't really a reason to suspect that I was involved, aside from my friend bolting away the second he called the cop. I have no idea why the cop didn't press me or go further or search around for Brett, but he didn't. And that was the end of the great bread heist of 2015. I remember going home after this and taking a very, very long shower. I just sat there and thought about how lucky I had gotten and how bad it could have been. It was so funny and thrilling, but also so stupid, because I was inches away from literally ruining my life over a couple loaves of bread. Over the next few months, I really can't believe Brett and I got away with this and the many, many other retarded things that we did. But what I do know is that it's safe to say my life was completely changed after 8th grade. I became more confident, I got out of the house, I learned many valuable lessons. And I have so many other stories from this single year of my life. We have barely scratched the surface, but the video's already long, so I'll wrap it up in a second. For those of you who watch this to the end, thank you, and I hope to make many more videos like this. But if this is the last time I'll be seeing you, let me at least fast forward over the next few years so you can learn how the story really ends. It's not actually very exciting. Brett and I continued to ravage our local community throughout 8th grade. My mom eventually found out that I was up to a lot of stupid shit, as parents inevitably do. Despite making a lot of stupid decisions, I still cared about school and really wasn't into drugs. But over that year, Brett's academics continued to slip, and so did he. At just 15 years old, he had already tried every controlled substance under the sun, and by the time we entered high school, we had pretty much completely grown apart and in two very opposite directions. I was back into video games and somewhat paying attention in class, and Brett stopped showing up to school as much. Eventually, by junior year of high school, I stopped seeing him in the halls altogether. I tried some drugs here and there. Hopefully you'll hear about those stories soon. But for the most part, I sat in class, paid attention, and went home and played Rust. From what he told me, many years later, Brett became a true addict. Before high school was even over, he was addicted to heroin and went AWOL from his parents, who were never very involved anyways. He ended up living in a crack den in a very seedy part of town with some very seedy people. And I'd like to end this with a happier conclusion, but I think nowadays he might be back to some of his old ways, but I'm not super sure. I had a very normal high school experience after that. I went to a good college, I got a good job, and now I'm here making this video. I hope you enjoyed. It was deeply personal, but hopefully I'll make some more soon.